Good morning, good day, and good evening. I'm, as always, your host, Brody Robertson, and today we have a returning guest to the show, Andrew Moore. Last time you were on, you were talking about the Firefox privacy-preserving attribution. So if you haven't seen the episode yet, go check it out. It's not at all relevant to what we're talking about today, though, because today we're talking about Linux gaming, Steam Deck, and various other Valve-related things. So, welcome back to the show, I guess.
Thank you. It's good to be back.
Absolute pleasure to have you back on. It was a fun episode last time, and I'm sure there's going to be... I don't know, I'm sure there's going to be a lot to talk about today, because there's... I do really think 2025 is going to be a very exciting year for Linux gaming in general. Not just for what Valve is doing with the Steam Deck, not just with, like, you know, Lenovo potentially having a new device, but just in general, with all of that ecosystem forming... 2025, you know, it's kind of cliche to say, you know, the year of Linux desktop, the year of Linux gaming, whatever. People like to say it every single year, but it really feels like we are at the point of something changing.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And even outside of the ecosystem, there's Microsoft being extremely bullish with the upgrades to Windows 11 requiring new hardware. And there's some people right now in the economy that we are today, there are some people who just can't afford new hardware. And they'll want to upgrade to something that allows them to play the latest titles. Mm-hmm. And for those people, they might be exposed to Linux through friends who might own a Steam Deck or one of the new devices that are coming out soon. So we'll see what happens. It's going to be really interesting to know how the market shapes up in the coming months.
Did you hear about Microsoft kind of like partially loosening the requirements for Windows 11? It's not. It's a weird state because it's. The way I understand it is you can install Windows 11 without TPM or without TPM 2.0, but you won't get updates or something like that.
It was already the case. It's just I think people latched onto a support article. Yeah, there was a support article that existed even before. Okay. So you can disable TPL requirements and install them, but Microsoft is essentially not guaranteeing support for those installs. You might have crashes. You might have features that are not available. One good example is if you want to play Riot games, games made by Riot Games. So the anti-cheat there, which is called Vanguard, does require TPM to be enabled on Windows 11, as well as hardware-based virtual memory. I forget what the security feature is. We'll see what happens here. Can you give me 1 second? There's somebody at the door. Oh. Sorry about that.
No, it's all good. It's all good.
Cut that segment. Yeah, be right back. Sorry about that.
No, it's all good.
All right. Do you want to restart that question, or do you want to start from here?
We can do. I'll just cut that bit out. You know,
okay.
Every episode with Random Heal, I get disruptions, but 3 minutes into it is certainly the quickest I've ever seen.
And yeah, just some random Nor Docker. I have no idea what was going on. Either way.
You're talking about Riot, Vanguard, TPM.
Yes. So Vanguard does require TPM and like Windows 11 security features enabled, essentially. So if you do have older hardware that doesn't support TPM 2.0, or you have those features disabled for whatever reason, you might want to have them disabled.
Wait, so does it not work on slightly older hardware on Windows 10 then?
So it depends on which hardware. There's some unsupported CPUs that do have TPM 2.0. Either it's provided by a motherboard chip,
right.
Or it is provided by a CPU, but there's other features like hardware-based virtualization, which is also a requirement for Windows 11. Mm-hmm. That might not be supported in the CPU SKU that you may have.
Right.
So in that case, your CPU is not compatible, but you do have the TPM requirement. Mm-hmm. But even in that case, you wouldn't be able to play Valorant, for example, because I think it would block you since you don't have all the Windows 11 security features enabled.
Okay, that's annoying. Let's see, Valorant. I don't play Riot games.
Me neither.
Okay, 2 years ago they removed support for older versions of Windows 10. So maybe it's the newer versions that might have some of those Windows 11 features in it as well.
Yeah.
Last year they dropped everything prior to 1709. Wait, no, that's 2 years ago. Okay, as of December 2023, I guess it's 2 years ago now, technically, to say they dropped everything below 1909 by the looks of it. Yeah. And at the time, they also dropped 7, 8, and 8.1.
Mm-hmm.
I would say Vanguard's probably the most extreme of the anti-cheats out there, with like how, because like, you know, you can still play a lot of like the what do you call it, like call it, like a lot of the Call of Duty games will still work on older versions of Windows 10 from my understanding, but Riot's like, no, you're gonna be on the newer stuff, get over it or don't play our games.
Yeah, pretty much. And I mean, some gamers are fine with that. I personally am not. I tend to avoid those types of games. But yeah, and it's coming to a point where unfortunately anti-cheats do need to validate the integrity of the runtime. Because the old system of just detecting like a cheat signature and banning it doesn't really work when you have cheat vendors that essentially roll out builds for individual users so that they don't get caught by those signature-based solutions. So it's unfortunately like a double-edged sword. I kind of understand why those solutions are there on the market. I don't personally support them. I personally think that it would be better if they would be server-side tools to do behavioral analysis. Is it perfect? No. There's going to be some cheaters that are not going to be detected by behavioral analysis, but it's mostly because they're behaving like normal users, and at that point, is cheating really impacting normal users?
Right. Yeah, if you have an aimbot which only aims at them when you can visually see them, like, is that actually that bad? Like, like, you know, you have two kinds of aimbots. You have an aimbot which will X-ray, and you have an aimbot that will only target things that are in your line of sight. Yes, it's still cheating. Yes, it should still be dealt with if it's known about, but it's certainly a lot less bad than, you know, being able to spot people without having any visual cue for them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can still detect snapping to people, even if they're just visually by behavioral analysis, right? So what you would have essentially an aimbot that will try to follow the user, the person, but as a human with some error and everything. At that point, you're just playing like a normal human, and you're just giving yourself a crutch. It's still cheating. It's still bad, but it's not affecting the general population. You would just look like a skilled player instead of looking like somebody who is less skilled. It's still an issue, but it's not as disruptive as the current cheats out there for gaming, which, personally speaking, has turned me off of competitive gaming.
The only like competitive multiplayer game I play right now is Marvel Rivals, and it has got a bit of a cheater problem. When you die, there's a kill cam, and you will sometimes see like a Hawkeye or a Punisher that's like following you through a wall. Like, you come out one side, and then it's just intuition. They know you're going to come out the other side where there's no indication whatsoever of it. Or the game has a couple of weird issues. Things that look like they're cheating, but they're not, because there's some like really bad code in the game. Some of the...
Yeah, it's desync.
Well, no, it's so much worse than that. There is... so you know how you're not supposed to, you know, tie any of your game logic to frame rate?
Yep.
Yeah. There's some game logic tied to frame rate. Things like horizontal movement with Doctor Strange's like upwards dash. Star-Lord's fire rate during his ultimate is tied to his frame rate. I think Wolverine's damage is tied to his frame rate. Like, again, just those are actual problems with the game. But no, I do agree with the whole behavioral analysis thing. And there are some games I've seen where they will actually intentionally put things that troll X-ray players, where they'll put like a player character outside the map or in an area they cannot get to. So if you are seen to be focusing on that target, just insta-ban, because no one can know it's there.
Yeah, absolutely. And Valve is trying that approach, I hear, with the new Counter-Strike. The issue is that, unfortunately, the players don't understand that those types of systems take time to train.
Right.
It takes a while to get it right, and right now, a CS2 is not necessarily in a super good place. It will eventually come. There's also the issue that it's costly for game developers to run those systems. You essentially have to analyze every single game. It's not like client-side detection. You're using somebody else's compute. You're not paying for those costs. It's great. When you're doing stuff server side, like at some point somebody has to pay for that compute. And there's no real incentive right now for game developers to do that. And until we see client-side solutions, even like the very invasive ones, stop working, which will eventually happen. It's a game of cat and mouse. We won't see developers shift towards server-side detection, but it's going to happen eventually.
The other thing that people often talk about is actually employing like GMs to analyze game systems that are happening, analyze kill cams, things like that. And Marvel Rivals actually does do this. So this is sort of like the two-sided thing here. They've got their anti-cheat, which is kind of like funky, but if you report people and they're actually cheating, they're going to get banned pretty quickly. I think they have like 40 people on staff that are just GMing. Now, you can do this because you are a free-to-play game that makes just a lot of money and you have 500,000 players on Steam, but I don't know, it's just not really super scalable to make that happen. Plus, it is very costly to have, full-time staff that are analyzing things, and yeah, it's a mess.
Valve did solve that issue, though. If we remember in CSGO, there was the Overwatch system where you could report a game and then it was reviewed by players, where players would essentially vote if it's suspicious or not, and if there's enough reports saying it's suspicious, then it would go to like a staff member. So the staff member itself would have very little bad data come in. You wouldn't have like reports for like normal stuff because it would be player verified beforehand. So players would essentially see an anonymized version of the replay for the suspected player, and they would get to see, okay, well, is it suspicious, or is it just I think the person is good, and then action would be taken based on that. So there's a solution out there to reduce the cost for game developers. I really hope we're going to see a shift. That said, for multiplayer, like competitive multiplayer titles, there's still some work that needs to be done on the Linux side for anti-cheat. And those systems somewhat already exist in the enterprise space, which is interesting. So we already have
the thing that caused hundreds of thousands of Windows machines to be knocked out. Is that what you were getting at?
No, not at all. So I'm talking in the server space. For a lot of enterprises, we have zero trust computing. CrowdStrike. You're thinking about CrowdStrike?
Yes.
Yep.
There actually was. People think about the Windows side, but there actually was like a big screw up on Debian as well. That's what I was remembering there.
Yep. So CrowdStrike does exist on Linux, but again, it's a kernel module. That's not necessarily what I'm talking about. But there's zero trust computing solutions that are out there.
For anyone who doesn't know what that means, can you just explain that model?
Yeah, essentially. So that model itself is you create a chain of trust where you don't necessarily trust every single component, but you can trust the system as a whole. So you have hardware solutions that would verify the hardware itself that hasn't been tampered with. Then we verify that the software hasn't been tampered with. But then you isolate your software package that you're going to run the server as much as possible so that the previous layers don't necessarily have a view on it. So you really don't trust the environment as a whole. But you can verify each part individually.
Right.
So kernel signing is a thing that already exists in Linux. And you see it on enterprise distributions like Red Hat or SLES, where they would offer signed packages that are signed by themselves, so you can verify the source of it. Linux themselves, when they release a kernel package, they do sign the code source as well. And we have like a whole bunch of like signing is nothing new in the Linux world. When you download something from your package manager, chances are it's signed by a PGP key, so you can actually verify that what you're downloading is the thing that you would expect. However, on the runtime, we don't necessarily see the same thing as you would see on Windows or Mac OS, where application packages are assigned themselves. It's usually the distribution packages that are signed, but once it's installed, the binaries themselves are rarely signed in Linux. But if you would have a solution that would allow for signing for every single one of the binary packages that you would have, a software solution in the kernel, you could have some interfaces as well there where you would say, okay, no, the integrity of the runtime is there. Every single kernel module is signed by its vendor. We recognize those solutions, and then an anti-cheat solution could say, hey, the runtime is good. There's no like self compiled packages there from vendors that we don't recognize, so there's no modification. We know like it hasn't been altered with. We're not running an hypervisor because that's also part of the hardware verification. So we're good. And there's stuff already that exists. Like if you look at Android, for example, is somewhat loosely based on Linux. There is Android validation. I forget what it's called. Google does that. There's a name for what Google does, but you can verify that the integrity of Android hasn't been compromised. It's used, for example, you can't use Google Wallet unless it passes that verification. Google, I forget what it's called.
Yeah, I'm not sure what I need to search to find the documentation on it.
There's the Play Integrity API, which is the integrity that you go through. Yes, but I forget what the there's a term for like the device itself, assertion that is done, and I haven't. That's something that I used to have at the top of my head when I was very much into CyanogenMod and modding Android devices. I haven't done that in a while, but you used to be able to somewhat bypass it and fake it, and nowadays it's like really hard to do. Which, to be fair, sucks for personal freedoms, right? You want to be able, you use Linux because you want to be able to modify your runtime and configure your machine as you want it. But at some point, if you're going to run software that needs to validate the integrity of your device, there has to be a compromise somewhere.
Right.
And having signed kernel modules and signed kernels, to me, is a lesser evil. And you can always choose to opt out and use whatever you want, but you wouldn't be able to play like anti-cheat protected games if we do go down that route.
Well, if this was sorry, I thought you were done there.
No, go ahead.
What I was going to say is, if that's the route we go down, you would end up having basically only certain distros that you could actually play games on, because you wouldn't. There's no way you would have every single operating system, every single distro in this system where it's signed in a way where the company agrees, like, okay, yeah, this is okay for our anti-cheat system, if I'm understanding it correctly.
Well, you could have official like kernel blobs from the kernel, right? And distros could ship that, and it would be signed by the kernel, or a distro could say, okay, well, I trust, let's say Fedora. We trust Fedora's keys and Fedora's kernel, so we're just going to use the Fedora Linux kernel, which is a stock kernel anyway. As far as I'm aware, they don't do any modification on the kernel.
Very minor stuff. Nothing
minor stuff, yeah.
Nothing like Ubuntu.
Yeah. So you would have distributions, that would have trusted keys and would have trusted kernels, but I don't necessarily see that as a bad thing. It just means, you would need to use like a signed recognized kernel to play anti-cheat protected games, and only anti-cheat protected games, right? It wouldn't stop you from playing the vast majority of games out there.
Sure.
And yeah.
The way I would see this go most likely, and you've already seen very minor cases of this already, is effectively the Steam Deck would be what that would happen on. It wouldn't happen with your Fedoras and Ubuntus first. It would be the SteamOS environment is what we say the games can run on. And there was a game recently which actually did exactly this. Infinity Nikki, where people initially thought it checked the CPU on your system. Someone then swapped SteamOS to Bazit, tried to run it, and it didn't work. So it's something on SteamOS it's checking for. It's obviously not to that same level of integrity checking, right? But it is checking for the Steam environment. So it's the first step towards going down that route.
Yeah, I wonder if it's just checking the etc release file.
It's probably doing something very simple.
Yeah. Because I've seen games where you could bypass it by passing Steam Deck is equal to 1 as an environment variable, because that's a default environment, but variable that is there on the Steam Deck. But Bazite, especially the Steam Deck distribution of Bazite, does that by default.
Yeah, there's something it's checking. No one's really sure, because, when you have an anti-cheat game, if you then start trying to test different versions, at some point you're going to get locked out of the game. So it's really difficult to, check each individual possible thing with no lead on what it could be.
Yeah, and it is somewhat of a... I don't want to use strong language, but it's a bit of a shitty thing to do from a game developer standpoint to just allow one distribution, not the others. Like, there's nothing special about SteamOS that would prevent cheating more than any other Linux distribution. At least not right now.
Right, yeah. If it did go down that route of zero trust where everything was signed and at that point, absolutely. And I wouldn't like it. I would prefer a system where more was accessible. But if that is what had to happen to bring these anti-cheat systems confidently over to Linux, it's better than nothing.
Yeah. And if it's something like, even if it would be like, for example, custom kernel that is signed, it could just be an optional install on any other distro.
Yeah, it could just be, here, install the Vanguard kernel on Arch or whatever.
Yeah. As long as I hope it's not Vanguard kernel, because or else you end up with a separate kernel for every single anti-cheat vendor. Please no.
Well,
that would be horrible.
Hopefully, okay, maybe it could be like install the SteamOS kernel or something like that.
Yeah, the Valve approved kernel or something like that. And I'm sure Valve is looking into something like that to like, I want to use the word appease anti-cheat developers, just because it is a known problem. And as much as I was personally peeved seeing, for example, Apex Legends doing a post saying they're removing Linux support without any data supporting, or any public data supporting their decision there. I kind of understand the premise behind it. As a software developer, I'm not in game development. I'm doing web development and data processing and stuff like that. But I kind of understand the premise behind it.
Right.
And as somebody who used to love multiplayer gaming, I grew up playing Unreal Tournament 99. That's probably the game that still today I have the most hours in. I kind of understand. But then again, if we go back to 1999 or any other like multiplayer games in the early 2000s, cheating was a problem, but not that much. Why? Because people had servers that they managed themselves. If somebody was an ass and cheating, they would get banned from that server.
Well, that's effectively the idea of game mods, right? Like you have, it's just game mods at a lower level. You are running the server. You are the game mod for that server.
Yep. And essentially, as somebody, like if you ran a server, you built a community around that server, it was in your best interest to actually run that server really well and ban like any cheaters and stuff like that. We had TF2 had a bot problem until very recently. And it was mostly on the the Valve provided servers where it was an issue, because if you went on a lot of like community run servers, those would get banned really fast, and you wouldn't have that much of an issue playing like on a community server. Now TF2 is in a much better place, at least on the bot front. I wouldn't say like as a game. I think as a game, it's slowly dying. I think people have seen enough of TF2, even though it was a fantastic game. But yeah, I'm saying that, but I haven't seen the numbers. I'm sure like it's still in the top played games on Steam.
Currently has 50,000 players online. It is... What? Oh, okay. Wait, what happened there? Did they... Wait, it went from 140,000 players to 70. There's not 70,000 bots they banned. Why did it drop like that? Yeah, from...
That's a very... Yeah, true. I'm seeing the graph right now.
Actually, wait. Is it just people playing over the holidays? Surely not.
Well, the holidays are not done.
Right, but it dropped on December 30th. That's weird.
There's
a similar peak around the middle of July as well. I do not play TF2. I have no idea why those numbers have happened. If anyone happens to know, please do let me know.
Yeah, that is very curious. Unless there was a uptick in bots again and they just released an update that fixed it. I have no idea. I haven't played TF2 in many months.
Yeah,
so,
like...
It's...
Oh, go on.
No, well, I was saying, like, the only competitive game that I kind of play nowadays is Overwatch, because strangely enough, it's not too bad to play with 250 ping. So... Me being from Canada, my partner being from Australia, we have a limited choice of games that we can play.
Right.
You would think that games like Borderlands would be fine. I don't know why. Borderlands steering is based on ping. So if you're in a car and you try to drive a car with 250 ping, it's about as good as driving under the influence, I would say. You're swerving all over the place. You can't control your car. It's an absolutely horrible experience. So even single player titles, sometimes it's a bit tough. But Overwatch 2, we've been playing it. I've been playing as Mora. Like I can't play like very like hit scan heroes very well with 250 ping, let's be honest. But like support heroes like Mora or even tanks, that's totally fine. And it's been a fun experience, to be honest. I haven't seen a lot of cheaters, even in quick play. I don't know what Blizzard is doing, but they're doing something right, and it's working on Linux, so yeah.
Well, that's good.
That's a bonus. Yeah.
Well, I don't know. Considering how people feel about Overwatch 2, with there just being less players, you're gonna have less people cheating in general.
Yeah, possibly. But the game it's in a good place compared to where it was when they switched from Overwatch 1 to Overwatch 2, I would say. So if you haven't played in a while, try it. They've also nerfed the most annoying hero, much to my chagrin, because I love playing as Sombra. So that's one that would go invisible and everything, and they kind of nerfed that power. But it is a fun game to play. And if you're looking for a shooter to play, like if you've been let down by Apex and you're looking for a shooter to play and you're on Linux, give Overwatch a go. It actually performs pretty well, and it's quite fun for what it is.
As I said, besides the cheater problem, Marvel Rivals also works perfectly. Literally no problem at all. With one exception, the Cosmic Desktop, because there's like a launcher when the game first opens, and I don't know why, but it opens in this tiny little box and you can't click on anything. They know about the problem. I think it's something to do with it resizing upon launching, and for some reason Cosmic doesn't know how to handle that. The only desktop that has a problem with it is Cosmic. Everything else works perfectly.
Well, the good news is it's going to allow them to find a bug that they wouldn't have found if it didn't exist. So
that's true. It would have probably popped up with something else at some point, but it's the only piece of software that I've ever seen it with.
Okay, well that's interesting. I'm interested in trying Cosmic when it's going to be a bit more stable. I'm on KDE and I'm very happy on KDE, but I need to try something new.
Yeah, Cosmic, it's coming along. According to Carl, I don't believe him. The beta's supposed to be sometime this month. That's
okay.
He thinks the beta will be sometime this month and full release will be in March. I don't believe that time frame. There's no way that time frame's happening.
We'll see, and we'll see when OpenSUSE is going to make it available, because lately they've been a bit slow on package updates, but it is what it is.
Oh, is that what you're running right now?
Yeah. OpenSUSE is my main. So I run OpenSUSE Tumbleweed on my desktop and on my like a mini PC for my TV. I run Bazzite on my Steam Deck, and we can get into the reasons why I'm running Bazzite instead of SteamOS. It's a long discussion.
Actually, no, yeah, for sure. I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah. Long story short, full disk encryption. I really think as a mobile device, like the Steam Deck is a fantastic device, but it's a mobile device. If you don't have full disk encryption and you're moving it around, you're kind of putting yourself at risk. And SteamOS doesn't have built-in support for booting onto like a Lux protected partition. Bazzite does, and it's working fantastically.
What is that backplate you have on it? Is that like it's like...
So that's an extreme rate transparent backplate for the original LCD. The original LCD Steam Deck, but it also works on the OLED model. Does still looks great on the original LCD model though. But yeah.
I didn't even know you could get custom backplates for it.
You can, and it's a small and super easy customization you can do on your Steam Deck to make it look personalized. So I'm running a red backplate on mine. My partner is running a green backplate on hers. And yeah, they're fantastic. GSOX also releases also has a series of backplates for the Steam Deck. They made holes for the fan, which I mean, there's some engineer to look at the thermal design of the original, like the Steam Deck when they designed it. They didn't put holes there, so I don't see why having additional speed holes for your fan would make it any cooler. I mean, they're still great quality though, and you can still buy them. But yeah, it's a really easy mod to do compared to just do a full shell replacement for the Steam Deck, which then you got to unglue the screen and do a whole bunch of things.
Right.
So yeah, I've also done other mods on my Steam Deck. So I replaced the buttons. I forget the name of I think it's Extreme Rate again that does like clicky buttons. for the Steam Deck, so I got clicky buttons on my OLED model.
Clicky for what? The face buttons?
So for the XYAB buttons as well as the D-pad.
Oh.
I mostly wanted a D-pad. I play a lot of like retro. I play a lot of like Kaizo Mario ROM hacks. The D-pad on the Steam Deck is very mushy. Which I mean, it's very functional for a lot of games, but if you're doing precision games with a D-pad, it's kind of it can be improved. Let's put it that way. So having clicky buttons makes it way better. So I've got that. This LCD deck that was an original launch LCD, which I gave to my partner. The battery became a spicy pillow, so that had to be replaced. That was an issue with the original VDL batteries. If you want to identify if you have a VDL battery, open it up. If it's vertical text instead of horizontal, it's a VDL battery. You can also use a bad info U power to see the whichever. So I replaced the battery on that, and the fan started clicking as well. So I just replaced the fan actually 2 days ago on this one. So yeah. Pretty fantastic devices. And it's impressive how Valve managed to make a user-friendly, and I'm not saying Linux is not user-friendly, but let's say normie-friendly Linux device. For a lot of people, they wouldn't even know they're running Linux.
Oh yeah, 99% of the time, you're in Steam big picture mode.
Yeah, exactly. And 88% of the games, and I'm not making up that number, I'm just looking at the top 1,000 games.
Oh, is it actually 88%?
That are rated by, from Proton DB, 88% are gold or platinum rated. A lot of games run fine on SteamOS. The problematic games are mostly multiplayer titles, and they're mostly shooters with anti-cheat. Maybe League of Legends is one that people would want to play on the Steam Deck and can't on SteamOS, but there's all games just work fine, and it's such a fantastic experience when you're on the go. You're sitting in a plane for 16 hours. Do you really want to see the same tired movies that they're showing in the in-plane entertainment system? Nah, just get a Steam Deck, and you've got like a nice 16-hour play session in front of you if you can't sleep. So yeah, it really is a fantastic device.
Mm-hmm. Well, that takes us into like the main thing I want to talk about. I don't even know where to start with this, because there's a bunch of different directions we can go. I think the first place to go to, though, is all the way back to when Valve first started trying to do this Linux gaming thing, when they announced the Steam machines as their own standalone thing. Now, for anyone who doesn't know the history of Linux gaming, this is about 4-5 years before Proton became a thing. Something like that. So, back then, 2013 was the Steam machines, I'm pretty sure. And then, like, 2018 or something was Proton.
So, Steam Machine was released in 2015, according to Wikipedia.
Okay. Where did I get 2013 from?
I don't know. According to Wikipedia. I could be wrong, though, but I think they announced it. During the...
Okay, there were articles that came out in 2013, but it might have been like a pre-release thing at that point. Okay.
Mm-hmm. So it was released on November 10, 2015, and Proton, the very first version, the initial release was in 2018. So it predates Proton by 3 years.
Yeah. The Steam machine was a horrible idea. I think it would have gone very differently if the early versions of Proton would have been available.
Yeah, I don't think it was necessarily a horrible idea. It was just horrible timing for it.
Sure, yeah.
The infrastructure for Linux gaming wasn't there yet. At least for running the most games, right? The Windows games. It was a machine before its time.
Yeah, I think. Well, even so, I think even if they did have Proton available, early Proton, the list was like 50 or so games. A lot more games worked. It's just they hadn't tested them yet.
Mm-hmm.
Things probably would have gone differently. It wouldn't have been as much of a failure, but I don't think we would have seen like this big uptick in Linux gaming like we did with the Steam Deck. Like the Steam Deck, it had given Proton a good couple of years to get good. When people forget before the Steam Deck came out, most things pretty much already worked. It's gotten a lot better since the Steam Deck, but it wasn't like it was bad before. I was only gaming on Linux at that point. The Steam Deck came out, it got even better, but I don't know. I think the Steam machines, the problem with Steam machines is they thought they could get people to port games. That's the issue they had.
It was also a tougher sell when people were not exposed to Linux gaming in general, because, okay, think about it. You're a consumer in 2015. You want to buy a Steam machine is a living room device. So you want to buy a computer you want to buy a gaming machine for your living room. Would you buy a PlayStation or an Xbox which has a series of established titles that is sold by a vendor you recognize, or buy something from Valve which you as a living room gamer would not necessarily recognize because you're not a PC gamer? Would you buy a machine that's running something in a library of games, and it says it's a very limited number of games that do work? It's only Linux. It was only, I think, Linux compatible games.
Yes.
So
it was running really Debian, so you could do play on Linux, but was Lutris available back then? I know Play on Linux was a lot more popular back then. I think Lutris was available, though. It was just very early on. But you wouldn't know about these things if you weren't already a Linux gamer. So it was like a device made without a market. So the PC gamers, they had a PC. The console gamers, they had a console. They didn't have a Valve, a Steam, a library
account.
And then the Linux gamers, they didn't exist yet. But the ones that did, they already were running Linux and didn't really have any reason to buy this machine.
Yeah, and if you would buy a living room machine, you would want a plug-and-play device, which didn't require any fiddling or setup, which the Steam machine wasn't. Let's be honest. It was the first step towards getting there, but it was before its time.
Speaking of games way before their time, it reminds me of another one, the Ouya.
Oh boy.
The Ouya came out, people talk about mobile gaming now, and there's Genshin, there's Honkai, there's all of these really good games. The Ouya came out in 2015. People were playing Bejeweled back then, and there weren't good Android games. Maybe there's an emulator or something, but today you have Fortnite, today you have Call of Duty Mobile. If the Ouya came out today, I don't think it would sell because everyone just plays games on their phone. But it would at least make sense as a device now.
Yeah, possibly. I think the issue with the Ouya, there was marketing, but also it was priced similarly as a cheap Android tablet and could play the same titles.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't you get a portable device that would play the same titles? Again, it would have been a tough sell for a device that is sitting in your living room and taking up space, for something that you could play on the go.
Yeah.
And Valve, I think, recognized that with the Steam Deck, because buying a mobile gaming device that you can carry around with you, it's way easier for consumers to understand that there will be compromises in that device. The performance will not be as great as a device sitting in your living room. But you can play any game, asterisk, that you want while on the go. The market bought it.
I have not spoken to anyone at Valve about this, but I would be very surprised if when the Switch came out, they didn't think, hold up, wait, people care about mobile gaming.
Yeah.
I am almost certain that the success of the Switch influenced the Steam Deck.
Possibly. And I mean, mobile gaming was not necessarily a market that was totally hidden, because I mean there was the Nintendo 3DS, and Nintendo targeted that market very, very well.
That's the thing, it was only Nintendo, because whenever anyone else made a handheld, the PSP, the PSP has a cult fandom, but it didn't sell well. The Vita didn't sell that well. And you have the what do you call it? The Nvidia Shield. That didn't really sell that well either.
No.
Everyone who's tried to do it has failed except for Nintendo.
Yeah, that is true. And Nintendo with the Switch created a market where not only it was mobile gaming, but when you're in the comfort of your own home, you can also play using your bigger TV and resume the exact same gaming session that you would have on mobile gaming. That's something that you couldn't do with a Nintendo 3DS, and that's the market that the Switch created for the Steam Deck. While yes, the Steam Deck has a dock and everything, I think for most people, resuming their gaming session means closing the game and going on the PC. And because of Steam Sync, you have your save file, you can continue exactly where you were. That's a huge selling point. I had an Xbox in my living room. I sold it because you know what? I prefer to have all my saves on one system, and then I can just resume my gaming session whenever I want. Versus having one of the games that I really love playing on the Xbox was Tunic. Having my Tunic save file be completely gone if I switch over to PC. That said, I could have installed it using my Xbox Store on PC. I'm not on Windows. I'm on Linux. I don't have access to the Microsoft Store, so that's not something that I could do. Now I can play Tunic on my Steam Deck. I can then resume playing on my PC if I want to, or even on I've got a little mini forms PC that's running OpenSUSE. Through Moonlight, just resume my playing session from the living room on my main PC, and that's great. It's one ecosystem that you can run on so many classes of devices, and it's fantastic. And Valve is also seeing that. That's why they're working on the Fremont device, right? So that's their new rumored Steam machine for the living room. That I think is going to be pretty popular considering the success of the Steam Deck. Some people will want that Steam experience now that they've seen their friends have it on the go. They might want that for the living room. And it's nice to know you can purchase your title once on Steam and not be, I'm sorry, fucked by Sony or Xbox by forcing you to repurchase that title on the next generation of consoles. If you own something on Steam, you own it at least for your lifetime. That's a different story. The Valve will close your account if you die. Your account is not transferable.
Also, if you get banned, you lose your game library.
If you get banned completely from Steam, not from individual games, yeah. If you, that's true. If you do get banned, you do lose your entire Steam library. That's true. I forgot about that, but
don't cheat.
It's still anti-competitive.
Don't get banned.
It's still anti-competitive. Yeah, true. But I still don't like that. It is what it is, unfortunately. But it's one purchase, and you can play on the go on your Steam Deck. You could play in your living room, maybe with your Fremont device, or if you have a custom mini PC that's running, if you don't want to run it remotely, run Bazite. It's a great operating system. Or you can play on your PC.
One thing I was thinking about,
on your MacBook if your game is compatible with Mac.
I actually think a lot more compatible thanks to the what do you call it, the Mac wine, the Mac compatibility layer. What is it called?
What is it? Crossover. That's the company that does wine.
No, it's not wine. It's the thing that Apple made that converted things over.
Oh, the game porting toolkit. Toolkit. Yeah.
What I was thinking about is, whilst the Steam machines were a failure, and whilst early Proton wasn't that successful, I do think both of those things needed to happen for the Steam Deck to be popular, because people, as you said, were not aware of Linux gaming beforehand. So if they had just dropped the Steam Deck without all of that history of the Steam machines, let's say Proton didn't exist until the Steam Deck and was in the state that it's in today, so it's really good, it still wouldn't sell that well, because people gaming on Linux? You can't game on Linux. Because there are still people today who think the Linux gaming is bad, but there's all this history of it being good, so people can actually go and correct them. But without that history, most people would be in that category of having no idea that, you can go pretty far with YouTube marketing and things like that, people making videos. Linux is incredible for gaming now, but you sort of need that history to get a lot of people up to speed, because a lot of people aren't paying attention to every single thing that comes out. They need, a good couple of years to know about something that's in their periphery is actually becoming a good thing.
Yeah, and seeing also that, for example, it works on SteamOS, but it works also on other distros is going to help change, I think, the general misconception that Linux isn't great for gaming.
Mm-hmm.
There's unfortunately some people today that still misunderstand, still thinks that Linux generally is bad. It's just Steam OS that's great.
Mm-hmm.
Not really. It's all the tools that Valve has made available runs on any distribution. Well, GameScope has some issues with NVIDIA still. I would argue that that's more of a NVIDIA problem than a Valve problem, but NVIDIA drivers are also getting are vastly better than what they used to be. And I say that as somebody who's running an NVIDIA GPU in my main on my main computer. But yeah, I wouldn't make that mistake again. Probably my next computer will be an AMD GPU. Who knows? But yeah, hopefully it does expose more people to gaming on Linux, to trying out Linux and seeing that, hey, you know what? Most of the things that I want to do work just fine out of the box. So that's why I really think, like, with the new devices that Valve is working on themselves and with their partners, we'll see more people getting exposed to Linux. One of them that I think is going to be really interesting is the new Lenovo Legion Go S. The reason why I'm saying that is while the Steam Deck is fantastic, global availability of the Steam Deck is problematic. It's only sold...
getting better, but Australia only just got the Steam Deck a couple of months ago.
Yeah, and I believe like people are starting to get their shipments of Steam Decks now. So for people who ordered it in Australia or New Zealand, but it's still an issue because if you're living in one of the 100 or so countries where you cannot buy a Steam Deck, then you don't necessarily have I'm going to say hero class device that shows you that Linux gaming is possible. Lenovo has a way bigger global reach.
I'm sure there's like one or two companies they don't sell to, but like compared to Valve,
yeah,
you probably have Lenovo devices in your stores.
Yeah, absolutely. So seeing the Lenovo Legion Go S being sold around the world, being announced at CES, it's going to be interesting to see how many people do choose to buy the SteamOS version as opposed to the Windows version. Then again, you could just install probably SteamOS on the Windows version. I think the hardware is probably equivalent, other than like the shell having a Steam button versus the other one having a generic Legion Go button. We'll see. The announcement is on January 7th.
Yes, for anyone who is watching this, we are recording this on January 2nd. So if this device does not exist, we will sound very stupid.
Well, I mean, we already know that it will be announced. We already know that Pierre-Luc Griffet from Valve is going to be present. So yes, this device does exist. We don't know the retail availability. We don't know if it's going to be released worldwide or only in select markets. So we're making assumptions here. But it's going to be an interesting device.
And at this stage, we don't really know anything about it performance-wise as well. Like we have a spec sheet, but like the spec sheet is you have to be stupid not to be able to fill it out. It's like, oh, it has an RDNA 2 chip. Oh, it has an M.2 drive. It has Wi-Fi 6. Like, this is, you can, like, guess the spec sheet, and you'll get all of this stuff right.
Is the Zen, the AMD Z2 Extreme still RDNA 2?
Apparently.
Okay. I didn't follow the release that much, so we'll see what it has. It would be interesting to see the first handheld with RDNA 3 if it does have an RDNA 3, but again, speculation. Nobody really knows what the hardware will be. But the original Legion Go is a really good device. To be honest, I've had the chance to try it a bit. One of my friends bought it, and yeah, it's good for what it is, but it is still a Windows device. Would I want Windows on a handheld device? It's Windows isn't built for that specific use case.
No, they've tried it.
Yeah,
they forget it. They try it and then they forget it exists for a couple of years.
I've got bad memories of Windows 8 and people not realizing that you had to go in a hot corner to open up the start menu because they removed the button. What a great user experience. They fixed that with Windows 8.1 like 6 months later, but yeah, Windows 8 was a UX disaster.
I didn't touch Windows 8. I didn't install 8 until 8.1 came out. I was like, 8.1's fine. It's not great. It's fine.
Yeah, it was okay. But that's yeah. And then Windows 10 was good. I unfortunately have to use like all three mainline OSs for work, so I'm kind of exposed to pretty much all the versions. Still, I choose Linux and KDE for my home computing. It's just it works better for my workflow. Yeah, I don't get pop-ups reminding me to enable whatever AI bullcrap that is being pushed by Microsoft that week. I am not reminded every single time I open a Windows Explorer that my files are at risk because I don't have a Microsoft 365 subscription to back up my files to OneDrive. It's just a better experience. You get one pop-up every single year asking you to gently donate to KDE, and that's a great way to do it. It's once a year. If you don't want to donate, say not now or just turn off the pop-up like forever. But yeah, it's a gentle reminder. And versus what Microsoft is doing, just reminding you to give them money every single time you open whatever Microsoft tool that you open.
Hey, if you wanna deal with pop-ups, just give it some time with Firefox. They've got their whole Orbit thing that you can now add into Firefox.
I am grateful that it is an add-on and not something that's built in.
Yeah. Well, it's an add-on for the beta. We have no idea if it's going to change when they have like it being fully done. I hope it stays an add-on though.
I hope, and if they bundle it, okay, that's one thing you can always like uninstall it as long as it doesn't come up with it doesn't come back with updates. But yeah, we'll see. I understand why it's happening. Unfortunately, boards and CEO level people really like AI right now, and yeah, does it create value for the user? I'll argue that no, but some people are really into it. It is what it is.
Yeah, Mozilla, like with their new CEO, like they're like really shaking things up, trying to like change how things are going. I don't know. They certainly needed someone to shake things up over at Mozilla. Like they didn't really know what they were doing.
Yeah, absolutely. They've also announced a new search partner, which is not default still, Ecosia.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so we'll see what happens with that. But I think they're also a bit shaken up by the fact that Google might be forced to end their, I'm going to say, subsidy of Firefox through the default search engine deal. So we'll see what happens with Firefox. It's still my main browser on all my devices. I use Firefox on my Android device. I use Firefox on my Linux devices. I use Firefox on macOS, and I use Firefox on Windows. And I have been doing that since version 4. I'm not going to change. and a lot of people are now starting to switch to Firefox as well, just because Google has been so bullish with ending Manifest v2. I hope that an uptick in users will show Firefox that it's important to make user positive change instead of being user hostile. We'll see.
So going back to the whole Fremont thing, where do you think they should be targeting performance-wise? Like, obviously, it probably should be, like, with it being assuming it's a real thing, a console-like device, it should probably be faster than the Steam Deck. Otherwise, it doesn't really make any sense as a device. But where do you think it should be?
It's a tough thing to answer because the best would be a device that is capable of 4K gaming, right? 4K TVs are relatively prevalent. Some people are like, it's going to be a device that's going to be living in the living room. It's going to be connected to a TV. You'll want to be able to output at 4K. That said, that's super expensive and it's relatively tough. In the PC space, we kind of have 1440 screens that are like the great middle ground for people to actually have like a high resolution display without having to like push 4K gaming. But yeah,
because there's also the price point that's a concern.
Yeah, I would say like their most likely target is probably like an Xbox Series S class of device, but with more memory. because that is one issue with the Xbox Series X, that the memory is a bit constrained
You
for
said
game developers.
S before, and then you said X. Which one are you?
Sorry, I said S as in Sierra. Sorry, that might be my accent showing. So the Xbox Series Sierra, let's call it that. It is memory constrained, which is an issue for game developers right now. So hopefully with more VRAM and more memory than this Xbox Series Sierra, but something that would be able to play like comfortably, at least 1080p gaming in the highest settings, and then for 4K, targeting 30 FPS, maybe.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Because this is a problem we're starting to see with the Steam Deck, where it's starting to struggle with some newer titles. I know Valve's talked about wanting to do like a new version when there is a revolutionary jump in performance. They don't want to just have, a new device every year and just cranking them out. I hope they do make something eventually. That would be nice. But the problem you're going to have, like, no matter what you do, right, it's going to become outdated. And with the... I've got plenty of things to say about the current way that game development's done. I really hate all this insistence on like upscaling tech, and just don't stop trying to have such high fidelity textures that you then need to scale down and then scale back up. It's a whole problem.
Yeah, part of it is the facilities that are provided by game engines like Unreal Engine, which does automatic LOD management and stuff like that. Before, in previous engines, developers had to actually optimize their games. They had to create their own level of detail meshes and everything. Now the engines do it for you, and game budgets balloon to such a level that it's just easier for them and for their workflow to have the engine manage that for them. Which, in a sense, it's great. It allows high fidelity gaming for a device that can actually run those games. But you're leaving all those devices behind by taking those shortcuts. One great example of that is the new Indiana Jones games, which only runs if you have ray tracing hardware. And I'm sure as a game developer... Yes, the new Indiana Jones and the Great Circle requires ray tracing hardware to run. That is in their minimum requirements. It will... I don't know if it refuses to run. Probably so if there's no baked-in lightning, but it does require ray tracing to run. If you open the Steam page, it is in the minimum requirements.
GPU hardware ray tracing required. That is insane.
Yep. And I mean, yes, it's simpler as a game, like a level designer and everything, to say, okay, well, I do have higher quality lighting, and I don't have to manage and bake all my shadows, and the game looks great. And it's way less work for me to create like good looking environments than having to create those light maps and having to actually place point lights and everything to make things look as I intend them to look, based on the art direction that I was given. But you're like... ray tracing hardware has started to become good with like 30 series like NVIDIA GPUs. Before, it existed, but you were sacrificing a lot of performance.
Yeah.
So all those people with like 5-year-old GPUs, 6-year-old GPUs that are still on the 20 series, they're left behind, or they have a poor
2060 is the minimum required card for the game.
But you're not having great experience. Yeah, you're not having a great experience playing that on a 2060. Let's be honest.
No. Apparently, it's targeting 60. If you're targeting 60, I imagine there's going to be dips below it, though.
Or I haven't played that title. Or it works, but the amount of ray passes that it does is so low that the light is extremely blocky.
Right.
And the quality isn't great. So that's another possibility as well, right? But you're not... Let's be honest, at that point, the visual degradation affects like your enjoyment of the game. Because it is, from what I've heard, a very atmospheric game, and it's really fun to play. But you're choosing to leave out a whole class of people who don't have the latest hardware. And at some point, yeah, like we've done that with rasterization before. Games used to be software rendered, and then you needed like voodoo cards and like 3D accelerator cards. Like we will see those shifts, but I think that shift is happening a bit too soon at the moment.
I think the difference as well is we're seeing. Here's another one of my hot takes. I hate ray tracing. I think every game that's done ray tracing actively looks worse than it could if they just put effort into doing the lighting properly. There's this insistence on making it stopped for a while and it was very nice. But when like the PS3 came out, there was this like, big push for more realistic graphics and things slowed down. And now that hardware's gotten really good and you legitimately can do, if not photorealistic, really, really close. And
I mean, movie productions are using Unreal Engine as part of their toolkit, so.
And what you're seeing is, rather than focusing on art style, you're seeing games that are like, oh, let's just make it look like real life. And that's fine for some games. But when every game from a AAA studio comes out and it has the exact same art style, I don't, like, if you show me a screenshot from 10 different AAA games, I legitimately could not tell you which ones they're from.
Yeah, and we've had that happen before. If you remember, if you ever gamed in the end of like the 2000 to 2010, like in the 2007 to 2012 period, every game was gritty and brown.
Oh yeah, no, I do remember the piss filters on games. Yeah, I remember that. That was fun.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, so it was like Gears of War started that trend, and just every single game just looked like Gears of War, and gamers like grew tired of it pretty quickly. We're seeing that push like to ultra realistic lighting and ultra realistic characters, which I mean, yes, it's great. Does it improve my gameplay enjoyment? Not really. Like the best titles that I've played this year have been indie titles that let's say, okay, Balatro, for example. It's not ultra realistic. It doesn't have great graphics, but it's a fantastic game. I'm playing currently 1,000 Times Resist. Very sci-fi look, fantastic game that in a genre that I would not normally play. But I've been enjoying it so far on my Steam Deck. It's been great. Games like Tunic, which have their own like distinct art style. Hollow Knight.
I played a bit of Hades 2 when the early access came out. Beautiful. Yeah. Granted, it's just Hades 1, but that's all I wanted.
Yeah, and Supergiant games have such a distinctive visual style. Their games have been great visually. And yeah, it's not super realistic, but it looks fantastic. I'm thinking of Ori, the Ori series, Ori and the Blind Forest, Ori and the Will of the Wisps. Beautiful games. Fantastic gameplay and everything if you're into Metroidvania type games. Great games.
Well, later today, I'll be streaming a game called Nine Souls, which, if anyone hasn't heard of that one, yeah, it's got a beautiful art style.
Yes. Fantastic. I'm stuck in one of the bosses right now. Yeah, so Nine Souls is a fantastic game as well. That's really, I love platforming and combat-based Metroidvanias. Such a great game. Animal Well, another great.
My brain's a bit too smooth for that game.
Well, you can still play like the first layer of the game. It doesn't necessarily revolve like it's based on like too much puzzle, so it's a great playthrough.
I definitely would check it out.
And then after that, if I would say, other than the very last layer, most people should be able to solve those puzzles. It's not that they're not that obscure.
But I think games like this, they take advantage of more modern tech whilst having a distinct art style. Like, a game like Animal Well, it uses 3D lighting for a 2D art style. And you see this a lot for... like a 3D-esque lighting. Or like, actually, a really good example of this, actually, is... Hollow
Knight is a 3D scene rendered and everything.
What is the Square Enix 2D, 3D game? There's like a mix of art style.
I know what you're talking about.
List of Square Enix games. Oh god, this company makes too many goddamn games.
It's not Bravely. No, it's not Bravely Default. I've got that in my head, but it's not. It's
Octopath Traveler.
Yeah, there you go. Yep.
Like, that's a game that takes advantage of modern lighting, modern game design tools, but has a very, very, very distinct art style.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And funnily enough, those games run great on a mobile device, on the Steam Deck. You don't need super realistic graphics and super realistic lighting to make a game fun.
Nintendo was the prime example of this. People always say, oh, Nintendo has with the exception of the GameCube, Nintendo's always had the slowest console in that generation. But it doesn't matter. The only reason the GameCube was faster is because no one knew how to program for a PS2. Because it was a weird architecture.
Yeah. That's true.
But, like, Nintendo has never been about graphical fidelity. They've always been, we are Nintendo, we make games first, we have an art style, you look at a Nintendo game, you know it's a Nintendo game. Like, there's no question about that. And I think this...
Go ahead, sorry.
What I was going to say is, limitation breeds creativity.
Yeah. It did bite them in the ass this generation, to be completely honest. There's been some quite sizable performance issues with Tears of the Kingdom when it came out. They did manage to fix it. The Pokemon games on the Switch are...
The Pokemon games are cool.
Yeah,
to be fair, Game Freak is one of the laziest game developers on the planet. Anytime a third-party studio makes a Pokemon game, it's just better.
Yeah. And there's also the Pokemon MMO, which is pretty fun to play as well, which is a fan game, which you can get, and it runs, by the way, great on Linux as well. So, yeah, I mean, they did have some issues with performance on some games, but I would agree that Nintendo does know. Nintendo. Yeah, true. But I would argue that Nintendo does know how to prioritize gameplay first. Bowser's Fury is the first-party title, which I just remembered that does have some performance issues when you play that mode, but
sure.
It's based on an older engine that was made for Mario 3D World, and they didn't upgrade it. And yeah, it is what it is.
Yeah. But like,
still a fun game
for sure. My main point though is like, you know, Nintendo has never been in this camp of like chasing like the most realistic graphics. What I always say is, if I watch a game trailer and the first thing I see is the developers talking about the tongue animations, I don't care about your game. I could not care less. Like, you're talking about things that do not have anything to do with the game.
Yeah. There was that weird section, I think, of maybe 10 years ago, where it was like about, oh, look at him walk up the stairs. The foot matches where it's supposed to land.
Yeah.
It doesn't tell me anything about the gameplay. I'm never going to look at that while I'm playing. It doesn't affect my immersion, even though if it was like a flat plane and the person was walking like a flat mesh and the person was slightly floating above the stairs. Who cares? Like, is the gameplay fun? Is the story fun? That's all that I want in the game.
Yeah.
Does it make me want to come back and continue the story, or does it just want me to like leave it aside because there's no substance there? It's just a graphical fidelity demo that lasts 12 hours.
Right.
That's not interesting to me.
Yeah, there's a lot of games that have basically become UE5 tech demos. Which is fine, but like, how many UE5 tech demos do you need?
One, Fortnite, that's it.
That's actually true. Fortnite is actually a prime example of a game, like you've probably seen people complain about UE5 games and every game in UE5 looks the same. Fortnite.
Yep.
It immediately proves you wrong. The issue is UE5 provides you a lot of tools, and a lot of game developers will use those tools, and only use those tools, and then you will start seeing things look very, very similar, especially if they are chasing photorealism. You know, if you want to to make a person, there's like a correct way to make a person look photorealistic. So you're going to have every game look exactly the same. And if every game is using the same lighting system, they're going to look the same. But you can be creative. You can make games. Is the new Final Fantasy VII UE5 or is it still UE4?
Good question.
Because I know the Part 1 and I think Crisis Core were UE4. But yeah, Fortnite looked it's Fortnite. It looked great. It might not be your art style.
And it has its own.
Sorry?
Yeah, it has its own distinct art style. It looks fantastic, and they're quite fast to the detriment of players, unfortunately, to push new features from Unreal Engine into Fortnite because that's their test bed.
Yeah.
Lumen was first introduced, I believe, and maybe I'm wrong, in Fortnite. Was it stable when it came out? No. But it was there. But yeah. I'll need a search for Final Fantasy. I don't know. And that strategy didn't always work for... Okay. That strategy of like using their own games as a tech demo didn't always work for Epic. And the best example of that is Unreal 3 Black Edition. It was a huge tech demo for the newer version of the engine, but they pushed graphical fidelity above gameplay. They also consoleized the game. They made it look very Gears of War-ish, which I never understood why. UT was always a game for the PC market. They tried to sell it to the console. It was way too fast-paced for console players. It was an arena shooter that requires precision. Yeah. And they ended up making a game that didn't sell well, and that killed the whole series, which was sad because I was very much an Unreal Tournament fan.
I completely forgot about this thing. Holy shit.
Yep. Like, UT was great as a game because all the maps were different. There was always that variety of assets and everything, and every single game was different. The community provided new maps every single game that you could play. There was new game modes made with the community. UT3 came out with a map browser that essentially revolved around the same three teams. There was like the Asian team for like the Izagani Corporation, if I recall, which all their maps looked the same. There was like the Necris, very like gothic, spacey style for the Necris faction, and then there was like the generic human industrial for the Liandry Mining Corporation. All the maps, the 50 maps that came out in the game, followed that exact same structure, and there wasn't any variety. Everything looked gray. The gameplay was okay, but you could see it was consoleized, and it's sad because it kind of killed my favorite franchise. Would I play arena shooters today? I don't think I have the reflex for it anymore, but it's yeah.
Yeah, no, especially if you go... Well, there are servers up for things like the older UT games. There are Quake 3 servers still up. The people that play those servers are fucking crazy.
Yeah. And if you're interested in trying UT99, if you're watching this podcast right now, it is Epic did a deal with Old Unreal a couple of weeks ago. You can actually go on oldunreal.com. In their downloads, you will find a full game installer, which does run just fine in Wine, by the way. They will release a Linux version shortly. But you can download the game for free and play for free. It does come with community-run master servers, so you can actually also connect to multiplayer games, and it runs fantastically. Awesome. It will run in modern Windows versions. It will run on Linux. It even runs on ARM-based Macs. There's a build for ARM-based Macs as well. So you can run. I believe they offer Unreal Tournament, and Unreal 2 on the website. So that's what they have deals with Epic Games. So pretty fun games.
I can't play them. I used to play, back in high school, I used to play a lot of Quake Live, which was based on Quake 3. This is before Quake Live became full of microtransactions, like every free-to-play game ends up doing.
Yeah.
But holy shit, the people that are good at Quake, man! Those people, if you've played, if you've been like a mono game Andy for the past 10 years only playing Quake 3, like you're a crazy person and you're really good at that game.
Yeah, especially on Instagib servers, it's just like you stand no chance. That said, it's a game that really reward you for trying to play and learning. The learning curve isn't that high, which is great for a game. It's not like, oh well, you're playing Overwatch, you got to learn all the heroes and like the counters. And no, I mean everybody is the exact same. Everybody plays with the exact same loadout. It's just map knowledge, where are the pickups and how the guns work, and that's it. So yeah, they're fun games. I love playing them. I don't have the reflexes to play them anymore, but I still play them once in a while.
I like something just a little bit slower. Call of Duty is as fast as I'm able to go, but even then, like people, if you've been playing Call of Duty since like Modern Warfare, like again, it's the exact same problem. You see people playing Black Ops 6 now, and the way people move around the map, like I can't do that. Nope.
Yep. And now you got to dedicate a whole hard drive to that game, so that's a bit problematic.
What is the size of Black Ops 6? It was some stupid number.
Oh, I don't know. They just decided to like package all their assets for all their games within one package, and then you get.
Oh, it's only 100. Wait, no, it's not 102 gig. Wait, I heard it was going to be smaller. Oh, it was going to be bigger than that. Did they fix it?
Did they fix it? That's a big question. Yeah.
Yeah, I do remember early on it was reported that it was going to be 300 gigs. They might have actually reduced it.
Even then, like, even if it's like 100-something gigs, why? Like,
well, I can understand a game being 100 gigs when it's like a Baldur's Gate 3.
But it's good. That size is going to be mostly textures and assets.
Yeah.
Like, and audio assets. Do you really need... Oh, you're also going to be... Okay, Baldur's Gate 3 has cinematics. That's also contributing to the size. If you're not rendering them in-game, which I believe Baldur's Gate 3 is...
Probably. Yeah.
So that wouldn't apply. But any game that does pre-render their cinematics and then shipping it as a video file... Yeah, that's going to contribute to the size if you have a lot of them.
Unless you want to be FF13 on the Xbox, where that game was across 3 DVDs because of the video, and they'd also hyper-compressed them, so they looked terrible. Because that game was made for a PS3 first, which had Blu-ray, and Xbox at the time was dual-layer DVD.
Oops. Yeah, I mean, you don't necessarily always want to render in game your videos because you can't necessarily do all the things that you want to do in game. But yeah, it's becoming a problem where games ship with such like I want to say like high resolution textures and stuff like that, but the issue is that you really need to have like 4K textures everywhere.
Yeah,
even if you target 4K hardware, nobody's gonna like be sitting right like in front of a wall.
Well, I talk about this with games like Forza. Like, do you need 4K graphics for the crowds? Like, no.
And even if a player wants that, make it an optional install.
Do I need 8K grass? Like, not really.
Yeah. No. If I want to touch grass, I'll go outside.
But yeah, you will definitely see this where there's a lot of games where they're like, again, it's cool, but I think again, limitation breeds creativity. You have like modern hardware has so much storage space. It has so much performance that you can get away with shipping 4K textures for random rocks on the ground. You can get away with shipping a toothbrush that has 100,000 polygons. Like it doesn't need to be like that.
Yep, absolutely. And you got games that are pushing the envelope the other side. Again, we talked about Animal Whale earlier. 33 megs, that includes all assets, all audio, all the music tracks, everything, 33 megs.
How big was the Balatro? I believe that was also really small as well.
Couple, I would need to check actually. I think it's a couple hundred, like maybe 100 megabytes. I can just go in settings here.
119.
Storage. Okay, that's not too bad.
But like, yeah, I think there's a lot of, with the AAA game industry being in the state that it's in, there is a lot of room for, this has been happening for a while, there's a lot of room for like the the indie games and then, your AA games to also become really, really popular. Like, again, like Baldur's Gate 3, that is a solo published title. If you want to be pedantic, technically, they're getting funding because it's like an officially licensed D&D thing. But games like Black Myth Wukong, games like Balatro, which is obviously an indie title by itself. There's a lot of really cool games coming out of China, which is actually like that. For a long time, you saw a Chinese developed game and you're like, oh, it's going to be full of microtransactions. And for a long time, that was true.
Yeah, or gacha mechanics, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But with the success of games like Black Myth Wukong, we're seeing a lot of other things where, it's showing that you actually can make a popular single-player title based on Chinese mythology from a Chinese perspective, and it's actually going to, sell well. And I think the reason it sells well is, firstly, obviously, it's a good game, right? Like, first and foremost, it doesn't matter what you want to base your game on. It has to be good, it has to have good game mechanics, and has to be enjoyable. But also showing that people want to see something new. Because, you've got a lot of... When we talk about games with like a East Asian aesthetic, usually that just means Japan. Like, Japan is the only country that exists in that entire region if you look at the history of gaming, with the exception of like one or two other titles. But now that like a lot of these developers are entering the market and not just trying to make mobile cash grab games, there's a lot of cool stuff that I'm really excited for. And that was not something I would have said about like anything a couple of years ago.
Yeah. There's a lot of studios that are seeing the value and respecting the player. Mm-hmm. And that sounds a bit ridiculous to say, but unfortunately for a lot of AAA studios, they kind of forgot that there's a player at the end of their pipeline that's going to play their game. Mm-hmm. It's mostly monetary transaction where you're developing a product for a market hoping to get a return on your investment. Mm-hmm. I'm never going to buy a Ubisoft title again in my life. Like, they've lost me as a customer.
Yeah, it's going to take a while.
Yeah.
Because I played, like, when I was a kid, I played Sands of Time. Fantastic game. I played the early Assassin's Creed games. Fantastic games. But, like, again, Ubisoft just doesn't know what they're doing.
Yeah, exactly. The new Prince of Persia and the Lost Crown game looks really interesting to me. Mm-hmm. Still not going to purchase it. I don't want to support Ubisoft. I used to own The Crew. They pulled that away from me because they don't want to remove the very optional online features that they added as an excuse to have their game always online. And now the game died because they didn't want to support for the server, which, by the way, is fine. Like, as a game company, you should be forced to support, like, to keep your servers alive. But at that point, either publish the protocol so that the community can actually, like, take the torch and do support for you, or just remove the online requirements and make it a single player title. Like, do something that allows the game to live on. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And Ubisoft does not do that. Instead, they decide to pull the rug and say, no, we're done with that game. We're done with the title. Thank you very much for your money. You can't ever launch the game ever again. They've done also like some, personally, I think is worse. People who purchased DLCs for Assassin's Creed's title, once they removed the DRM for that, you couldn't access the DLC content unless you already had it installed. Not on console release because that was tied to the console shops, but for PC, there's a few DLCs for Assassin's Creed that is no longer accessible if you don't have the software already installed. I forget which one.
Brotherhood. Revelations?
Yes.
Maybe it's a couple of them.
It's a couple of them, yeah.
Yeah, old Assassin's Creed DLC are no longer available, so... what? Okay, AC3 that is part of the remastered version. I'm getting so much conflicting information. I'm definitely seeing Brotherhood and Revelation, though. That's so dumb. That's so dumb.
Yeah, it is unfortunate that companies feel they have the right to do that. Mm-hmm. It is unfortunate that in most jurisdictions, the law does allow them to do that.
Yeah.
Hopefully, we'll see a push from Europe to actually outlaw that, and that's going to force maybe a global change. Unless they want to be petty like Apple and just say, okay, we're just going to change stuff for the Europe market and everybody else can get screwed.
Yeah, I did see that. For anyone who doesn't know what he's talking about, that's when the EU forced Apple to allow side loading, also known as installing software without using the App Store. They decided to make the change on EU devices. No one else.
Yep.
Which is something like this is the difference between a hardware change and a software change. I talked about the whole USB-C enforcement thing the other day. A software change is a lot easier to make for a single region. Forcing USB-C, like having to make a Euro device and then a worldwide device, like that's a lot harder to do. That costs engineering effort. You need to actually manufacture devices. So that's a lot, like there's a lot more effort in making that happen. Plus, Apple doesn't really lose out on anything if you have USB-C. They do lose out on something if you can install software without going through their store.
Yep. And it's not the first company that did that, by the way. Microsoft also did that with the
barking. You were saying,
yeah. So it's not the only company that did like changes specifically for the Europe market that was only available in the Europe market. Microsoft also did that with browser choice screens, where if you installed an edition of Windows in Europe, you had to have a screen that allowed you to select an alternative browser. I believe it was part of the Windows N edition that was released in Europe. Maybe I'm misremembering, but it also didn't have like,
had been designated. Oh, it's because they were designated the gatekeeper because of DMA. Mm-hmm. Okay, yep. That makes sense.
Yeah. So essentially, when you first did install Windows, you have a screen that allows you to select an alternative browser install. Let's say Firefox, instead of just having Edge pre-installed and set as default by out of the box.
I didn't realize they'd done this. I've heard people say they can't do this. It'd be way too confusing to the user. They literally already have an interface for it.
Yeah. Same thing with Google, by the way. Google implemented the change in the out-of-the-box experience for Android as well, only available in Europe, where you actually select what browser and what stuff that you want. Then
this is the one for the search engine I found. Okay.
Yeah, it's possible for the search engine. Yeah, but they did do one. They did a consent screen on a choice screen on Android as well. And then they turned around and said to US lawmakers that no, it's not possible. It's like going to be too confusing for users. Mm-hmm. You're already doing it in one region. It's one extra click. It's at some point like there's nothing wrong giving the user a choice. Mm-hmm. The only reason why you are scared of giving a user a choice is because you don't believe your product is the best. I personally don't think that Google has that fear because the majority of people use Google search. I don't. It's been shit. But for Microsoft, I kind of understand because Edge is just, well... it's okay now, but
yeah. I look at the list of search engines. The ordering of the search engines feels petty to me. So, DuckDuckGo, Ecosia, that's usually what they have at the top. Now, where they have Google search is like 3 or 4 down. On every single UI, Brave Search is the one directly below Google.
It's supposed to be random.
Okay, maybe it's just the screenshots they have.
Yeah, so it's possible that it's only the screenshots that they have. It's either random or alphabetic. I think was the two options that were.
It's definitely not alphabetical. Yeah, that's.
But no, it wouldn't be advantageous for Google to put it alphabetical. I wouldn't put it past them to just do. It's going to be random, but we're going to make sure like Google is part of the first 3, which. Probably is still somewhat compliant.
Probably. I would imagine they probably are required for it to not be the first option, though.
Yeah.
I have not looked at the regulation, but I'll be very surprised if that was not a requirement.
Yeah, unless they can prove like, no, it's random. It just so happens that sometimes it's on first, which probably would pass as well. Sure. If you're doing a true randomness and you can actually like get that audited, I'm sure that would be okay.
Sure. But I don't know.
Sometimes you're lucky.
Sometimes you're lucky. Well, yeah, lucky if that's the way you want to call it. Yeah. I know. I do hope the EU does something and steps up with the whole game issue thing. The problem is. Go on.
Hopefully, Australia and Canada follows as well. I have very little hope for the US, but
the thing with games is, once the software's out there, it's even if it's not even if they don't make it so it's possible for other regions with what they provide, the software's out there. People are going to make it happen. Like, they might not like that it's happening, but I don't know. There definitely will be workarounds if they start making it more possible to actually build community servers for stuff.
Yeah, true. The way I see it is, though, is like game is part of culture nowadays. Like, gaming is just a core part of how we consume multimedia and consume stuff. Like, you had, like, if you look at the like all the past history that we can actually like look and study today is because of written accounts.
Mm-hmm.
And if every single written account, every single like visual account was behind a DRM door that you couldn't open anymore, what would we really know about history?
Yeah, Mozart under DRM. Yeah. Like, no Mozart anymore.
Yeah, exactly. And we're kind of walking towards
you can't see it, deleted.
We're kind of walking towards that future, and it's kind of scary. Like, what's going to happen in 200 years when we want to see back at what life and culture was like in the early 2000s?
Mm-hmm.
If everything is just every single media is disappearing. We have entire TV shows that are produced and then killed and completely erased because they weren't profitable, because it's just better for tax reasons to make it disappear.
Mm-hmm.
That culture is gone. If somebody wants to like actually see, okay, well, what was so bad about Concord in the year 2024, and I'm studying that from doing a PhD in like game design in like 2300 something, maybe I would like to like look at that like the game and study it. You can't anymore. It's gone. And yeah, it's a bit sad to see that something that is such a core part of some people's identities, myself included, I consider myself a gamer, can just disappear because one company decided to just say, no, I don't want to support this. I don't even want people to see this because, I don't know, I'm ashamed or something. It's a bit troubling.
Yeah, and like the market of, you know, whether you want to call it game preservation, game piracy, whatever term you want to call it, it's all basically grouped up together anyway. That only really goes so far, and there's some games where it's just not possible. And there are efforts to revive deleted games. Like, there are community servers being worked on for like Final Fantasy 14 1.0, which is that game's just gone. The game doesn't exist anymore. But people are trying to bring it back. There's like most of the way there from my understanding. Or like before, like old school RuneScape came out, there were people running private servers for old versions, or classic WoW. People were running old servers for old versions of WoW. And yes, that'll happen, but for some games, firstly, it's just not possible. Secondly, no one's trying to do it anyway. So
there's some games that some people just don't care anymore, and maybe it was culturally significant at some period of time and just isn't anymore because it's a 20-year-old game and like nobody plays it anymore. But yeah, it's a touchy subject. I just hope that we see more customer-friendly legislations being brought up by various different jurisdictions around the world. It's probably going to be the EU first, let's be honest.
Yeah.
But things need to change.
They do, but, you know, it's the only way it's one of these problems where it's not going to change until people that are in those positions understand that there is a problem. And this is a problem you have, especially, you know, you see hearings. I think the best example of this are the TikTok and Facebook hearings in the US, where I think one of the questions, the TikTok one, was, does TikTok connect to your home Wi-Fi? It's like, yes? Like, That's how it has to work. Or, like, in the Facebook one, I think there was complaints about Google to Mark Zuckerberg. It's like, the people who are doing these hearings don't even know what it is that they are complaining about. And I'm glad the EU seems to, like, at least have some people there that know what they're doing. Because, like, USB-C would never happen in the US. Like, you ask a US senator what USB-C is, most of them probably have no idea. There's, like, a couple of them that are in, like, 30s and 40s, which would probably know. I know there's one who has streamed on Twitch before. She probably knows. And the rest of them have no idea.
Yeah, and they don't care. To be completely honest, they don't care. And that's a reality that's everywhere, right? The people who are being elected are becoming older and older, and not necessarily in touch with the technology changes of today. And some people don't necessarily are literate in technology. And there is once that generation essentially stops being in power, by either through time and everything, we're probably going to see some more positive changes. That said, we also have a situation where the youngest generation, I would argue, are probably a bit less tech literate than we are, simply because they live in the magical land where everything just works out of the box, versus we kind of lived through like the early days of computing where like we had to fight to get computers to do what we wanted. But it's still way better. Like they'll understand, for example, USB-C. They'll understand everything. It's just, I see personally in the line of work that I do, a lot of like more junior developers, as soon as they hit an error message, instead of reading an error message, they're just like, well, I'm blocked. I can't do what I want to do. It's like, man, you got to learn to read error messages, like do a bit of diagnostic. It's not like computers are not magical. Not everything works all the time, but there's that skill of like being able to troubleshoot, which seems to be, and being willing to troubleshoot. I think that's one of the biggest problem I would say Linux will have, is that not everything runs out of the box. You will have to learn new things. You will have, like, if you want to switch to Linux, you have to learn new things. You have to learn how to troubleshoot issues. And that's not necessarily a skill that every single human on the planet has. You have to learn and adapt and become good at it.
The idea
that's normal.
The idea of troubleshooting on Linux is this is why game developers, that you just ask any of them that have a bunch of bug reports. Almost all of them are going to say most of them come from Linux users, because Linux users, for the most part, are more used to having to report bugs. Like, even if you're not like reporting every single bug you have, most people have probably gone to a Bugzilla, a GitHub page, a GitLab page, and reported something. And it's just part of the culture on Linux to report bugs you see. Whereas on Windows, usually what you'll see is if a application crashes, it's like send bug report. There's just like a button there. And that, like, having that on Linux, on more Linux applications probably is a good thing. But by it being the only option people are exposed to, and a lot of applications people use don't even have a public way to report bugs anyway. If you ask me, how do I report a bug against Adobe Reader? I don't know.
Do you have a support plan with Adobe? No. You're gonna have to deal with that bug. That's it. And yeah, no, definitely. And there's also some class of issues that are just caused by the way Linux is. Like dependency management in Linux is just a whole beast on its own. You have some dependencies that are modified by some distros for some odd reason whatsoever, and then you have applications trying to run against that version of the dependency that's not necessarily the same as like the upstream one, and you get some classes of bugs. Flatpak is great for that though, where you have all the dependencies somewhat self-contained within the container. You do have some external things that you can pull.
You're triggering the NixOS users. They're going to be in my comment section right now. every time I talk about containerization or anything like that, NixOS people immediately show up, be like, NixOS solves all your problems.
It is very possible that NixOS has another solution as well. I've actually dabbled a bit in NixOS. I haven't gone deep into it. I want to switch my NAS to Nix because right now I'm using open source Tumblewheel Slow Roll, and I just want to be able to just rebuild it easily using a Nix file. That would be great. But yeah, I need to look into that. And it's very possible that Nix has a solution for it. But let's be honest here, the one with the widest reach at this time is flatpaks.
Yeah.
And it does solve a real problem. One would hope that once Linux has a higher user base, we would see more software vendors actually providing their apps as flatpaks. Yes, it does take more space. I agree. However, space is pretty cheap nowadays.
Yeah, 100 gigabyte games, spinning... 300 gigabyte games.
Okay, well, that's a different thing. But we're talking about difference, like 30 megs of difference between a flatpak versus a non-flatpak version. Like,
well, yeah, no, we've all seen my point is, like, we've seen the graphs of, like, storage price. Like, a terabyte is, how much can you get a terabyte SSD for now?
I would say 150 Australian dollars, probably. If you're just looking at a SATA SSD.
Wait, is that? Hold up. Here we go. Here's a nicer one. Here is 2 terabyte, 4 terabyte, 2 terabytes, $200.
Yeah, and I've got a crucial 1 terabyte SATA SSD for 92 Australian dollars.
Yeah, M.2 drive from Kingston, 75. Again, this is Australian dollars, which are not real, so that's like 50 US dollars. So
storage is cheap.
Yeah, a few extra megabytes. I'll complain about a few extra gigabytes, like an extra 20 or 30 gigabytes. But like, once you got into the stages of having multiple gigabyte drives, no one really cared about having additional bits being used or extra kilobytes being used. Then when we get into the terabyte stage, you don't really care about extra megabytes being used. And you could argue, yeah, maybe this is a bad thing and, games stop being optimized. Yeah, absolutely. But at the same time, I'm not going to spend all day worrying about it.
Yeah, and in that situation, it's going to be mostly the same thing downloaded over and over again and installed. Just use a file system with deduplication capabilities. Then it's basically free. So you do have options, and yeah, it would be nice to see like more software vendors start adopting flatpaks instead of just offering like deb packages and RPM packages for their software, which may work on your distro if you're using one of the mainline ones, may not if you're not using one of the mainline ones. Versus flatpak is pretty much going to work everywhere.
Honestly, I'm surprised that, like, with Snap being, the Ubuntu thing, and them pushing, like, they have deb packages, I'm surprised that, like, Snaps hadn't become, like, the main thing that companies just distributed their software as. It is for a lot of companies, but, like, I'm surprised it just didn't become the default.
Yeah, it really depends on how many people are using Ubuntu and Snaps in the enterprise space, right? Sure. Which is not going to be a lot. So I think that's pretty much why we still see deb and RPM packages.
Maybe there's a lot of developers at the companies that just don't like Snaps, and that's why they don't do it.
Yeah, and there's also the other issue that a lot of tools are CLI only, and Flatpaks is not great for CLI applications. There's a misconception that it doesn't work for CLI applications. That's false. It does. It's just that you got to do Flatpak run and then the package ID to run your thing, which is not great. One would hope that Flatpak will come up with an alias system where it would automatically.
No, you can run it just as the name of the Flatpak.
Can you?
Yeah.
So if
yeah. So like OBS, what is the OBS package called? If I just run com.obsproject.studio, like that will
but it's but it's that's a full device, that's a full package name, right?
Yeah.
So it would be nice to have just an alias to say like, I want to open OBS, just open absolutely. OBS. I kind of understand why they don't want to do that because they want to avoid collisions and stuff like that. But it is a bit more cumbersome to always have to remember like the full package name because sometimes the package name does not make sense.
Yeah.
If it's an individual developer, you don't necessarily want to remember like the full legal name of the developer if they're using that for a package name, for example, which could be an issue. So if I release like a package in Flatpak, yeah, for sure the package name is going to be ca.andrewmoore. Whatever the package I'm going to release because that's the domain name that I use professionally. But do I really expect users to remember that? Not really. Do I really want to type that every single time I want to use a CLI tool? That's not why I'm using the CLI. I want it to be faster, even though you have auto completion. But it is an issue that I would like to see solved. But that said, I just have an alias file that I manage, and it works just fine.
Yeah. One thing you mentioned earlier about young developers not being great at dealing with error messages. My understanding is people thought that the kids growing up with tablets and phones from a very young age would basically just learn how technology works through osmosis. And they do understand really deeply how phones and tablets work. It's the rest of the stuff that's a problem.
Yeah, and it's in phone and tablets. You like it's more sandbox environments. You rarely get errors showing up in your face as a user, versus on a computer, especially on Linux. Like you got to understand. Like, okay, well, and what does this error mean? And to be fair, a lot of error messages on Linux are not useful. I
love getting error messages about some issue in a library for an application I didn't write. Like, what am I going to do with that?
Yeah, just give me something useful that I can share to the developer or that I can understand. Like it feels like it's the old days of like even Windows wasn't like Windows when they first released their print to PDF drivers. If you would print a PDF and get the save box and do cancel on the save box, you would get an error message saying operation failed successfully.
That developer wrote that. That is not a UX designer that wrote that.
No, and it was something ridiculous like that. Like it's just there is a severe lack in Linux, other than some DEs that have great UX designers. There's a severe lack of thought into I want to say user experience, and it's understandable because most of Linux development is led by developers, which it's great. We get a lot of things that we wouldn't get in another OS. But I think if really 2015 has to, like, or whatever year is going to become the year of the Linux desktop, we need to start thinking about user experience, because not every single Linux user is a developer or a technical user. And yeah, it's something that is severely lacking at the moment.
We are definitely starting to see more of that, but when Linux doesn't have any shortage of devs, but
nope.
When it comes to people who are actually UX designers, like right now, basically what you have is both KDE and GNOME. I really don't like the direction that GNOME's going. I've talked about that plenty of times. I think it's actually just making the experience worse. But outside of that, and outside of like Cosmic, people are kind of just up to their own devices, doing whatever they want. And the problem you have when a developer is designing something is the same problem you have when you don't have any people testing an application. You know how the application works. You know things that you can do in the application. But the second you hand it to someone who doesn't, a lot of those assumptions, like why is the button here? Why does the button have that icon? Does it have that name on it? Or, when I tested out the Arch install script, if you entered a character that wasn't the correct character, so it would suggest, hey, press Y or N to do yes or no. I just pressed O and the application crashed. And these are things you just run across if you are the only person working on the application.
Yeah, and O is not like an outlandish answer. If you have a French user, it's oui or no for no. You would have maybe used O as an answer because you're not thinking you're running an English script and you're used to French software. So it's something. I'm not saying like you should handle O as yes and still go ahead, but you should at least like prompt the user and say, hey, that's not the answer I was expecting. Press Y if you want to say yes, or no if you want to say no, or and if you want to say no. But yeah, there's things like that where you don't necessarily need to be a UX designer, but always tell yourself when you're developing a software, will my grandmother understand this? Will a 10-year-old understand this?
Well, something I was taught in when I was in university is just assume that every user is malicious.
Yep.
Because if like anything you leave there that can be broken will be broken, even if it's not intentional, it will happen.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, assume the user is malicious and assume the user is not necessarily educated enough to use a computer. And yes, it's going to frustrate some people. They're going to be like, "Oh, why is there so many warnings? There's like so much text. It makes it slower to use." Yes, but you're making software to target the majority of people. If you're making like a developer tool, don't do that. Like it's personally annoying.
Yeah.
But if you're developing a desktop environment, if you're developing a software that's going to be used by a majority of users, if you're developing a software that's going to be used by gamers, for example, make it as intuitive as possible to use it. It's gonna make it so that more people use your software.
Yeah, this is I do definitely agree about the dev tools. The problem you have with dev tools is when they don't spit out useful errors that you can work out a problem with. Like I've run into libraries where it's not telling me a problem that I did, it's telling me a problem with a dependency of the library. So I'm like, I don't even know, like, what does that have to do with what I'm doing? Like, I'm not using that library.
Yeah, because sometimes it's hard when you're doing like you have a stack tree that is error out. It's kind of hard to know okay what's the original call or like 10 items up the stack. So I kind of understand why it's happening. Yeah, that's a bit of a harder problem to solve, I would say, in that situation. But if you want to look at something that's Linux that I think they're doing a fine job is Bazite. Installing Bazite on your device, if you go on the website and you say, okay, I want to download Bazite, it asks you some very simple question. First one, what's your hardware? Are you downloading this for a desktop? Are you downloading for a home theater PC? Is it for a handheld? And if you select any of the questions, then it's like, for example, if you select handheld, they're not going to ask you the hardware. They're just going to say, okay, fantastic. You're using a Steam Deck. What do you want? Do you want KDE like SteamOS? And they actually say, like SteamOS. They don't expect you to know what KDE means. They tell you that's exactly what SteamOS uses, or do you want GNOME? So it's very simple questions. If you select desktop, they'll ask you, okay, what do you have? Do you have an AMD CPU? Do you have an NVIDIA CPU? Do you have an Intel? And they even tell you which series to select. And then you'll download an ISO with all the drivers, everything pre-configured for your specific device that you wanted to install it on. And it makes it really simple for end users to install.
This is actually the best download page I think I've ever seen.
Yeah, it's pretty great. They could put that all in the installer, to be fair. But the issue with that is that you're not guaranteed that you'll be able to boot into the installer because you might have like bad hardware, or if you require NVIDIA hardware, do you really want to boot to a screen that's like VESA compatible, like 800 and 600, where you have stuff cut off? So they're really asking those questions beforehand to make sure that you have the best experience.
Yeah, I remember when Bazit first came out, you would go to the download page, and it was just a list of the different ISOs you could download.
Yeah, and that was a pain. But now they're doing a great job. And even when you download after that, they say, okay, well, here's your ISO download. So if you select Steam Deck, then KDE, and then they say, okay, well, here's the initial setup guide that is usually specific to your device. I think for that one, it isn't. Okay, no, they link you to another page, but they could link directly to installing Bazite on Steam Deck if they really wanted to. But yeah, it's something that is user friendly, and it's not very confusing for the user because they already at that point they boot, they install, and they already have a pretty good setup for what they were expecting to do.
Yeah, I definitely want to talk more about this. I'll definitely probably do a video on this. It was actually really cool. I was not aware at all of this system.
They do that, so Universal Blue does that for every single one of their distribution. They also do that for Aurora, which is their... Yeah, so if you go Aurora, get aurora.dev, they have the exact same type of setup where they ask, okay, what do you want to use this for? So do you want desktop, laptop?
What was that link?
Get aurora.dev. I'll type it in.
Aurora dev. Oh, okay. Download.
Which is another universal. It's another Universal Blue distribution. But yeah. And they ask you simple questions, and you get something that is tailored to what you wanted.
That's really cool. Yeah, like I this makes a lot more sense to do at this point rather than like, you'll see a lot of installers where it's like, hey, would you like to like Ubuntu? Do you want to install the minimal packages or the full packages? And like, what does that mean? Tell me.
Yeah, and the worst example of that personally is OpenSUSE.
Where
it's going to ask you, what profile do you want?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what profile do you want? Where there's like a whole bunch of different profiles. You want KDE minimal, desktop, like a whole bunch of different things. And then after that, you get into the partitioner where it's going to say, well, we've done some magic for you. And if ever you want to change that magic, good luck. You can, but then you have to make all your selections manually. Mm-hmm. It works, to be fair. As a power user, when I've installed OpenSUSE multiple times. Mm-hmm. Like, I know my way around on the AST installer, but it's not great UX for somebody who doesn't know what they're doing.
Right. But yeah. Again, lots of developers in the Linux world. UX designers, not so much.
Yeah. While we're back on the subject of Bazzite, if ever you want to set up a nice and you don't want to wait for the Fremont Valve machine, Bazzite on a mini PC for the living room is absolutely fantastic. Super easy to install. If you have an AMD GPU, you can get a SteamOS-like experience where you boot directly into game mode. It will not work right now for NVIDIA. At least didn't before. Maybe Gamescope fixed the upstream issue, or Bazzite did. But you boot straight up into SteamOS. It's a great experience. If you have a Steam Deck, you can also easily install Bazzite. You get all the trimmings of SteamOS. You boot directly into game mode. You can also fully encrypt your disks, which if you're going somewhere with your Steam Deck, I'm sorry for a lot of people think, oh, well, SteamOS has a pin screen. That's secure. No, it isn't. You can just boot into an alternate OS, and I can get all your session tokens and everything. Mm-hmm. If I wanted to, their full disk is not encrypted, and also I could get your PIN. It is plain text into a config file. The command to get it is...
You just boot off of an Arch ISO, and you can do everything you want.
Exactly. Or even it doesn't mean any Linux distribution.
It's just first thing came to mind. Just anything where you have a command line where you can just install stuff, or you can mess with stuff.
Absolutely, and you can read just catting a file and then grepping. You can get your PIN. I can get the lock screen PIN right away if your system is not encrypted. So it's not. That's one thing that I wish Valve would improve, is just have full disk encryption by default. And there's a TPM in there, just unlock it automatically. It's not gonna hurt performance. I personally don't use a TPM. I use a FIDO key to unlock my Steam Deck, but again, it's just on full reboot, which I rarely do. It's a great Linux distribution for gaming. If you want to try Linux and you don't want to wait for Valve OS, give it a go. Install it on its own partition. Now, dual booting does have its challenge. My recommendation for that is have your Linux bootloader in a separate disk than the Windows one. Don't try to integrate both together. You're going to have issues. Not because Linux is going to mess it up. Windows is going to mess it up. Yes. So if you just have your boot partition on a completely for Linux on a completely different disk, then you can just rely essentially on your UEFI BIOS to have a selector to choose which one, or you can boot on your Linux disk, and usually Grub is pretty good at detecting Windows, and then switching back to Windows, and you will still have secure boot. You will have everything if you actually follow the mock-util prompts. So yeah, there's solutions out there, but
yeah. Well, on that note, we should probably be wrapping this up.
Sounds good.
I guess we didn't really talk about any of your stuff, but let people know where they can find your stuff and anything else you want to mention.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you can find me on Blue Sky now, nice. Which my handle is andrewmoore.ca. You can
you did set that up. Good.
I did set that up. Yes. You'll find me also on the web, andrewmoore.ca. I'm also on Mastodon, which I'm not going to say my handle. Just find on my website because I don't. It's finalwolf.academia.io. But saying that out loud, you'll forget it in 30 seconds. And yeah, I sometimes streams. It's been a year, to be honest. I usually stream retro games like Mario ROM hacks and stuff like that. I'm Fine Wolf on Twitch. But we'll see when I stream. I don't know if I'm going to stream often. But yeah, other than that, it's pretty much my socials.
Awesome. And now you're also in my time zone, which is at least temporarily, and soon
temporarily.
Permanently.
Yeah. So that's gonna be fun.
Yeah, try to stay cool. How warm did Canada get? I actually have no idea.
Well, in Montreal, we often have summer days that are similar to Brisbane, where it's like super humid and hot. However,
super humid here. Good luck with that.
Yeah, it's not. It's not that bad. It's
dry heat. We love it.
My issue is I landed in Adelaide, right in the middle of the heat wave where it was like close to 40. I left Montreal when it was -10, so that was quite a shock. But yeah, it's my third year now, so it is what it is. Like every single time I come here for the holidays to be with my partner, it is a temperature shock, and then after 2 weeks, I just adapt.
Hey, at least
it will be good.
At least the winters aren't really that concerning. It's for you, it's probably like shorts weather.
Probably. The issue is like when it gets cold, when it was hot, that's when I struggle.
Mm-hmm.
When it was very cold and gets like to those spring temperatures, kind of like where you have here in winter, then yeah, it's shorts weather. But I fully expect to struggle during Australia winter, just because I'm gonna go from like 40-degree plus weather in summer to, well, yeah, on the worst of days, 8, 5 sometimes. Yeah, so it is what it is.
Yep. Well, I guess we can wrap it up there. So my stuff, my main channel is Brody Robertson. I do Linux videos there 6-ish days a week. I've got the gaming channel, Brody on Games. I will probably be streaming 9 Souls when this comes out. I don't know what'll be in the other slot. I need to decide on that. I've got the React channel where I just upload clips from the stream. And if you're watching the video version of this, you can find the audio version on basically any podcast platform. It's on Spotify as well. Search Tech Over Tea. There is also an RSS feed. If you'd like to find the video version, it's on YouTube at Tech Over Tea. I'll give you the final word. What do you want to say?
2025, the year of Linux consoles. That's going to be interesting.